With a trembling hand, I took the divorce papers from my husband, Ethan. I knew this moment was coming, but wasn't prepared for the coldness in his eyes. Holding back tears, I calmly retrieved a small envelope from my purse and handed it to him, my gaze unwavering. As Ethan opened the envelope and saw its contents, his face turned pale. The room was silent. Ethan's face drained of color as he sat back down, gripping the envelope tightly. His eyes darted back and forth as he reread the contents. He seemed to be in shock, his knuckles white from holding the paper so tightly. I could practically hear his heartbeat. We both knew the significance of what he held, and the air was thick with tension. I watched him, waiting for the reaction I had been hoping for. His expression fluctuated between disbelief and anger, making it clear that he had not anticipated any of this. He glared at me, clearly searching for any sign of remorse or hesitation. I remained as calm as I could, even as my nerves were frayed thin. His silence was deafening, each passing second stretching into eternity. Ethan's sister, Laura, barged into the living room, catching the intense atmosphere immediately. Her eyes flickered from Ethan's pale face to the envelope clutched in his hands, and then to my calm demeanor. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice a mix of confusion and concern. The energy in the room shifted as she tried to piece together what had just happened between us. She asked what was going on, but Ethan waved her away, too stunned to answer. His silence only heightened her anxiety. Laura, always one to need answers, turned her questioning gaze to me. "What's in that envelope?" she pressed. I remained silent, unwilling to break Ethan's moment of reckoning. The tension in the room was palpable and Laura's frustration was mounting. I took a deep breath and decided to leave the room to give him space. As I walked toward the stairs, I could feel their eyes on me, burning holes into my back. I needed to distance myself, to let Ethan process the information in his own time. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard the hushed beginnings of a conversation filled with confusion and shock. Later that evening, I overheard Ethan and Laura arguing loudly in the kitchen. Their voices bounced off the walls, piercing through the otherwise quiet house. It was clear that the contents of the envelope had caused a significant rift between them. I was tempted to intervene, but decided against it, choosing instead to let them work through their emotions without my interference. Laura yelled, "How could you keep this from me?" Her voice was filled with betrayal and hurt. The weight of her accusation hung in the air, making the atmosphere even heavier. I felt a pang of guilt for being the catalyst of their conflict, but I knew that the truth needed to come out. I leaned against the wall, listening to their argument unfold, bracing myself for what might come next. Ethan mumbled something I couldn't make out, his voice low and shaky. Laura, however, seemed to catch every word. Her face contorted with a mix of disbelief and fury at whatever he had said. "That's not good enough," she snapped back, her voice trembling with emotion. I strained to hear more, but their conversation quickly descended into a hurried mess of overlapping voices. I peeked around the corner, seeing Laura clutching the envelope, her knuckles white from the grip. Ethan stood there, looking defeated but defiant. "You're not telling me everything, Ethan," Laura accused, her voice softer now, but no less intense. She held the envelope up, shaking it slightly, as if demanding it reveal more. The sight of them in that state made my heart ache for the simpler times. Laura didn't wait for any more answers. "I can't believe this," she muttered, tears welling up in her eyes. She turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Ethan stood there, staring at the now closed door, a mixture of relief and worry etched on his face. The silence that followed was almost deafening, the house echoing with the sound of Laura's departure. It was clear that the contents of the envelope had caused a significant rift between Ethan and Laura. The tension in the house was palpable, a cold void where warmth used to be. Ethan seemed to be grappling with something far deeper than just the words on the paper. What had once seemed like a simple confrontation had now spiraled into something none of us had anticipated. The next morning, Ethan avoided me completely. He left for work without a word, his eyes refusing to meet mine. I could feel the weight of his avoidance like a heavy blanket. Every little sound in the house seemed amplified in his absence. The walls seemed to close in as I wondered how we would continue living under the same roof with this unresolved tension. I decided to visit my best friend Jenny to get her advice. I needed to talk to someone I could trust, someone who would listen without judgment. As I drove to her house, I replayed the events of the past few days in my mind, hoping that Jenny could offer some clarity. I pulled into her driveway, feeling a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Over coffee, I explained everything that had happened since I handed Ethan the envelope. Jenny listened intently, her eyes never leaving my face. And that's when Laura showed up, I concluded, taking a sip of my now lukewarm coffee. Jenny leaned back in her chair, processing everything I had just told her. She looked stunned, but I knew she would have some valuable insights. Jenny was shocked but supportive. "Wow, that's a lot to take in," she said finally. She suggested I prepare for anything Ethan might try next. "You never know how people will react when they're cornered," she warned, her voice serious. Her words hit home, and I realized how unprepared I was for whatever might come next. I needed to be ready for anything. I promised to stay vigilant and not let my guard down. Jenny's cautionary tales about her own experiences reinforced the gravity of the situation. "Don't underestimate him," she advised. "Just keep your eyes open." I nodded, understanding the importance of her words. Taking her advice to heart, I started formulating a plan to navigate the uncertain waters that lay ahead. Jenny mentioned she had some contacts who might be able to help if things got messier. "I've got a friend who's a private investigator," she offered. "She's discreet and really good." The idea of having professional help was reassuring. Jenny promised to reach out to her contacts immediately. Knowing I had more resources at my disposal, I felt a newfound strength and determination. Ethan's lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, called me that afternoon, requesting an urgent meeting. His voice was curt and formal, leaving no room for negotiation. "Can you come to my office today?" he asked. The urgency in his tone left me little choice but to agree. I hung up the phone, trying to prepare myself for whatever awaited at this unexpected meeting. I arrived at Mr. Reynolds' office, greeted by his stern expression. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," he began. His office was cluttered, papers strewn everywhere, giving an impression of controlled chaos. He asked if I was sure about revealing the contents of the envelope. "Absolutely," I replied, standing firm in my decision. His eyes narrowed, and he warned of a possible legal battle ahead. He asked if I was sure about revealing the contents of the envelope. His eyes bore into mine, measuring the weight of my resolve. I met his intense gaze without flinching. My answer was clear and unwavering. "Yes, I'm certain," I replied. My voice carried the firmness of my decision, leaving no room for doubt. Mr. Reynolds nodded slowly, his expression turning even more serious. I nodded, knowing I had made the right decision. The gravity of the situation hit me, but I refused to back down. The contents of the envelope held power, and I intended to use it. Mr. Reynolds sat back, folding his hands on his desk. "This won't be easy," he warned. I held my ground, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Mr. Reynolds then warned me of the possible legal battle I was about to face. "Ethan won't take this lightly," he said. His tone was ominous, like a storm cloud on the horizon. I took a deep breath, mentally preparing for the fight. "I'll do whatever it takes," I responded. Mr. Reynolds gave a slight nod, acknowledging my determination. I left his office feeling a strange mix of dread and resolve. The warning about the impending legal struggle loomed large in my mind. As I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoed my determination. Outside, the sky seemed to mirror my internal conflict, clouds threatening rain. Despite the uncertainty ahead, I felt a quiet strength within me, ready to confront what was to come. Over the following days, Ethan tried to act as if nothing had changed, but there was a palpable tension in the house. Our interactions were brief and strained, the air heavy with unspoken words. It was as if a dark cloud hung over us, permeating every corner of our home. The weight of the envelope's revelation lingered, affecting even the simplest of conversations. One evening, I found him drinking heavily in his study, muttering to himself. The sight of the empty bottles scattered around him spoke volumes. "What do you want?" he finally slurred, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. I said nothing, choosing to leave him to grapple with his demons alone. The smell of alcohol and defeat clung to the room, intensifying the already thick tension. I stayed out of his way, but couldn't shake the feeling that he was planning something. His mutterings grew more incoherent by the day, and I could sense a brewing storm. Each night, as I lay in bed, I listened for any sign of trouble from his study. The uncertainty gnawed at me, making it impossible to find any sense of peace. I decided to stay with Jenny for a few nights, just in case Ethan's behavior grew more erratic. Packing a small bag, I left a note on the kitchen counter, explaining my temporary absence. Jenny welcomed me with open arms, understanding my need for a safe haven. The softness of her guest room provided a stark contrast to the tension-filled environment I had momentarily escaped from. It was a relief to be away from the constant stress and uncertainty. Jenny's home was a sanctuary, filled with the warmth of friendship. We spent evenings talking, trying to distract ourselves with old movies and shared memories. Despite my worries, being in a supportive environment allowed me to breathe a little easier. I knew this break was temporary, but it offered much-needed respite. I set up a meeting with a private investigator named Mike from Jenny's place. We met in a secluded cafe where I could explain my situation freely. "I need your help," I told him. Mike listened intently, his notebook ready. As I recounted the series of events since Ethan received the envelope, I noticed his eyes narrow in concentration. "I'll keep an eye on Ethan," Mike assured me. We met in a secluded cafe where I explained my situation and the events that had unfolded since Ethan received the envelope. Mike, a seasoned private investigator, listened intently, jotting down notes as I described the chaotic days. His face remained stoic, but I could tell he was processing every detail. The cafe's ambient noise faded into the background as I laid out the complexities of my situation. Mike agreed to help and promised to keep an eye on Ethan's movements. "I'll make sure we get to the bottom of this," he assured me. His confidence was contagious, giving me a sense of relief. I left the cafe feeling like I had finally taken a concrete step toward resolving this nightmare. Mike's commitment felt like the first ray of hope in a long, dark tunnel. I felt a glimmer of hope knowing someone was looking out for me. The reassurance from Mike was exactly what I needed to regain some confidence. The heaviness that had settled over me began to lift, even if just a little. I called Jenny afterward, updating her on the meeting. She was just as relieved, knowing a professional was now involved in the investigation. Jenny and I discussed our next steps, focusing on gathering evidence to support my case. "We need to be thorough and leave no stone unturned," she said, her eyes full of determination. Together, we made a list of potential leads and evidence that could help. With each item we noted, my resolve grew stronger. Having Jenny's support was invaluable to me during this tumultuous time. Although I hadn't seen Ethan in days, his presence loomed large in my thoughts. It was impossible to escape the shadow he cast over my life. Every phone call, Every knock on the door made my heart race. I tried to focus on the task at hand, but found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. The uncertainty of what Ethan might do next was suffocating. Mike provided regular updates, mentioning that Ethan had been meeting with several people, including a well-known divorce attorney. "He's definitely trying to cover his tracks," Mike remarked. His updates, though concerning, made me feel more in control. At least now I had eyes and ears on Ethan's movements. Each piece of information from Mike was a puzzle piece, helping me see the bigger picture. One night, Mike spotted Ethan heading to a storage unit he had rented years ago. The discovery piqued both of our interest. What could Ethan be hiding there? The idea of secret stashes or hidden documents fueled my curiosity. Mike promised to investigate further and keep me informed. I felt a mixture of trepidation and anticipation, wondering what this new lead would reveal. Suspicious, Mike investigated further, uncovering some questionable financial documents. "These don't look legal," he said, showing me photocopies he had taken. The papers that hinted at irregular transactions and hidden accounts. My heart pounded as I realized the implications. This could be the evidence I needed to strengthen my case. Mike's findings added a new layer of complexity, but also gave me a glimmer of hope. This new information could potentially turn the tide in my favor. Armed with the documents Mike had uncovered, I felt more confident about confronting Ethan. The walls of secrecy he had built were starting to crumble. I shared the updates with Jenny, who was equally hopeful. "This could be the leverage you need," she commented. With each revelation, I felt my resolve solidify even further. I confronted Ethan about the storage unit after returning home briefly to collect more of my things. "What are you hiding?" I demanded, holding up the copies of the documents. His reaction was a mix of anger and desperation. "You've crossed the line," he spat, accusing me of invading his privacy. The confrontation escalated, and he demanded I leave immediately. I knew this battle was far from over. His reaction was a mix of anger and desperation, accusing me of invading his privacy. "You had no right to snoop around my stuff!" he shouted, his face flushed with rage. I stood firm, holding the copies of the documents tightly. "You left me no choice, Ethan," I replied calmly. The air between us crackled with tension, neither willing to back down. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. Ethan threatened me with legal repercussions, but I held my ground. "You'll regret this," he snarled, his eyes narrowing with malice. "I'll see you in court." I felt a shiver of fear, but didn't let it show. "Do what you have to do," I replied, steel in my voice. Deep down, I knew the battle was only beginning, but I was prepared to fight for the truth. The confrontation escalated quickly, and he demanded I leave the house immediately. "Get out!" he barked, pointing toward the door. "I don't want you here anymore." His words were sharp and final, like a door slamming shut. I grabbed my things, my heart pounding in my chest. As I walked out, I glanced back at him, seeing the mix of anger and desperation still contorting his face. I knew I was fighting a battle on all fronts, but I was determined not to let him intimidate me. Each step away from the house felt like a step closer to the truth. I called Jenny to update her, feeling the weight of the confrontation still pressing down on me. "He's not going to make this easy," I admitted, "but I won't back down." Jenny's encouragement was a balm to my frazzled nerves. With Ethan's threats increasing, I decided to involve the police. It was a drastic step, but necessary for my safety. I drove to the local police station, my mind racing with what I would say. As I walked in, the sterile environment and the buzz of activity were a stark contrast to the chaos in my life. I approached the desk, feeling a mix of determination and apprehension. I met with Officer Martinez, who was sympathetic to my situation. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. I laid out the events, from the moment I handed Ethan the envelope to our recent confrontation. He listened intently, taking notes and nodding occasionally. His understanding demeanor made it easier to share the details, and for the first time in days, I felt heard. We discussed the contents of the envelope, Ethan's behavior, and my safety concerns. He knows his secrets are out, I explained, and his reactions are getting more volatile. Officer Martinez leaned back in his chair, his brows furrowed in thought. "It's critical that we document everything," he advised. "This will not only protect you, but also provide evidence if things go to court." His practical approach gave me a sense of direction. Officer Martinez advised me to file a restraining order and stay somewhere safe. "We'll take this seriously," he assured me. "Your safety is our priority." I filled out the necessary paperwork, my hands steady despite the weight of the task. "Stay with friends or family for now," he suggested, "and avoid any contact with him unless absolutely necessary." His guidance felt like a lifeline in a storm. Meanwhile, Mike continued his investigation, uncovering more troubling information about Ethan's financial dealings and personal life. "It's worse than we thought," he said in our next meeting, handing me a thick folder of documents. The contents revealed hidden bank accounts, dubious transactions, and other skeletons. My stomach churned as I realized the depth of Ethan's deceit. Mike's diligent work was painting a clearer picture, one that would undoubtedly strengthen my case. As the court date for our divorce approached, tensions skyrocketed. Ethan's lawyer started digging into my past, trying to find anything that could discredit me. It was a dirty game, but I stayed focused, gathering all the evidence Mike and I had collected. Jenny helped me organize everything, her calm presence a constant source of strength. The day of reckoning was fast approaching, and I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. Ethan's lawyer intensified their efforts, digging into my past and trying to discredit me. They subpoenaed old records, interviewed acquaintances, and looked for any dirt they could find. Even the smallest inconsistencies were blown out of proportion. It was an aggressive strategy designed to put me on the defensive. But I refused to be rattled, knowing that I had the truth on my side. I stayed focused, gathering all the evidence Mike and I had collected. We meticulously organized every document, phone record, and financial statement. Each piece of evidence felt like a small victory in an overwhelming battle. Jenny helped me compile everything into a cohesive narrative. We knew that every detail mattered, and leaving no stone unturned would be crucial in proving my case. On the day of the hearing, I presented my case confidently, knowing the truth was on my side. I walked into the courtroom, head held high, and laid out the evidence for all to see. The judge listened intently, and the atmosphere was tense. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of Ethan's deceit. I could see the reactions in the courtroom, the shock and realization spreading. Ethan's reaction was one of barely contained fury. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the table, trying to maintain his composure. But the truth was undeniable, and his mask of calm cracked. He shot furious glances at me as if willing me to crumble under the pressure. Instead, I remained resolute, knowing that every word I spoke edged us closer to justice. His pale face betrayed his fear of what was to come. Each revelation chipped away at the facade he had desperately tried to maintain. The courtroom's silence was suffocating, amplifying the weight of every damning piece of evidence. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding mine. The once confident demeanor was replaced by a palpable sense of dread. We all could see the walls closing in on him. The judge called a recess, giving both sides a break before final arguments. I stepped outside, feeling a rush of cold air hit my face. It was a small respite, a moment to gather my thoughts before the storm resumed. Ethan's lawyer looked frazzled, pacing and talking rapidly into his phone. It was clear they were struggling to find a way to counter the mounting evidence against him. During this time, I revealed the final piece of evidence from the envelope. It was the most damning of all. A revelation that would turn the tide decisively in my favor. The courtroom hushed as I held up the document, the weight of its contents evident in my demeanor. Ethan's eyes widened in horror as he realized what was about to be exposed. The silence was deafening. Ethan had been hiding a serious medical condition and extensive debt from his gambling addiction. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, the gravity of the reveal causing a ripple of shock. This wasn't just about financial deceit. It was about betrayal on the deepest level. Ethan's double life was laid bare, and the ramifications were clear. The judge's eyes narrowed as they processed the severity of the situation. The court was in shock, the revelations hanging heavy in the air. Gasps and whispers filled the room as everyone tried to make sense of the new information. Ethan seemed to shrink under the collective scrutiny, his earlier bravado gone. The judge called for silence, but the underlying tension remained. It was clear that this would be a turning point, altering the course of the proceedings. Ethan's lawyer stumbled to provide a defense, visibly shaken by the new evidence. He fumbled through papers, trying to find something, anything that could mitigate the damage. But the more he spoke, the clearer it became that they were grasping at straws. The judge's face remained stern, unimpressed by the floundering attempts at explanations. Ethan's case was unraveling, and there was little his lawyer could do to stop it. The judge, visibly affected by the revelations, called for an immediate review of Ethan's finances and health records. "This situation is more serious than initially presented," she stated firmly. The courtroom buzzed with renewed interest, reporters scribbling furiously. It was clear that the contents of the envelope demanded thorough investigation. Ethan's lawyer continued to struggle, the weight of the evidence seemingly unbearable. Everyone waited for the next move, the tension almost tangible in the air. Ethan's face turned even paler as he realized the full extent of the implications for our divorce settlement. He glanced nervously around the courtroom, his eyes landing on me briefly before darting away. The judge's stern demeanor left no room for misinterpretation. Ethan's earlier arrogance was replaced by a palpable sense of fear. His hands shook slightly, betraying his inner turmoil. The gravity of his situation was sinking in, and there was no escape. Witnessing the judge's response was overwhelming, but I remained composed. I sat straight in my seat, breathing evenly, conscious of the eyes upon me. Ethan's unraveling was stark, but I refused to let it cloud my judgment. With each passing moment, the courtroom's atmosphere shifted. The judge's focus on Ethan only intensified his visible dread, validating the importance of my decision to reveal the envelope's contents. I knew composure would be my strongest weapon now. I knew the truth was on my side. Each piece of evidence we provided was like constructing a fortress, our case impenetrable. The judge's call for an immediate review indicated a certain level of belief in my assertions. I glimpsed Jenny in the gallery, her reassuring nod offering silent support. My resolve hardened. This was my moment, and I needed to stay focused. The truth, our strongest ally, would guide us through. Ethan could do nothing but watch as the legal battle shifted dramatically in my favor. His confident facade crumbled with every document presented. The courtroom was now fully engaged, all eyes trained on him as he squirmed in his seat. Each revelation cut deeper into the narrative he had tried to fabricate. The power dynamics had clearly shifted, and Ethan was rapidly losing ground. He was cornered, and everyone knew it. I left the courtroom knowing victory was within reach. There was a new lightness in my step, something I hadn't felt in weeks. The weight of uncertainty had started to lift, replaced by a sense of accomplishment. Outside, the fresh air felt crisp and revitalizing. I called Jenny immediately and heard the joy in her voice, mirroring my elation. This was only an interim victory, but it tasted sweet nonetheless. My confidence grew with every step as I saw Ethan's desperation increase. The shift in power was evident. He no longer carried the same swagger that once intimidated me. Each interaction was now filled with a palpable sense of dread on his part. His lawyer's frantic demeanor only added to his visible panic. This was my turning point, and I was determined to maintain the upper hand, no matter what. Back at Jenny's place, we celebrated the progress we had made. "We're almost there," Jenny exclaimed, pouring us both a glass of wine. The mood was lighter, a stark contrast to the stress of the courtroom. We reflected on how far we'd come, each step bringing us closer to resolution. Laughter punctuated our conversation, a welcome reprieve. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't seem so daunting. Mike continued to monitor Ethan's activities, ensuring he wouldn't cause any more trouble. He updated me regularly, his vigilance a comforting constant in the chaos. "He's still meeting with different people, but nothing concrete yet," Mike reported. Knowing someone was keeping tabs on Ethan provided immense relief. It allowed me to focus on the impending legal battle without looking over my shoulder constantly. Every new piece of information brought us closer to a safe resolution. As I prepared for the final court date, I felt a determined resolve to see this through to the end. Jenny helped me organize documents, and Mike provided his latest findings. Each preparation step felt like gearing up for a decisive battle. The cumulative effort over the past weeks had led to this pivotal moment. I steeled myself, ready to face whatever came next. The truth was my armor, and I was ready to wield it.